It is another episode of the Juice on the Cuse podcast. Wes Cheng alongside Jim Stechschulte. Thanks so much for joining us on this Sunday, September 1st, 2024. And we begin today with where else? The Syracuse football team. They defeated Ohio 38-22 in their 2024 opener. It is the first win of the Fran Brown era. From defensive struggles to new weapons emerging on offense, we've got a lot to go over. Jim, where do you want to get started on the win?
We could just start with, there's a slow start, and then on both sides of the ball, and then things came around. The defense looked a little, I don't know what the exact word is for the first quarter when they give the two long Ohio drives. Both times they stiffened up once the Bobcats got into the red zone and forced field goals, and it sandwiched a 3-0 by the offense. But then once the second drive, the defense really stood up strong after the Bobcats got down to the 6-yard line. And then that seemed to turn things around. They held the Bobcats to the field goal attempt there. And then a couple plays later, after they got the ball, the offense was off and running in the second quarter. And then really turning the game around and mostly having the game fully in hand. Let's say by halftime. The scoring drive before halftime that took 44 seconds to go 75 yards to go up 17-9 at the break. I think that really helped them put the clamps on the game right at that point, even though they did give up that score early in the third quarter.
Yeah, so I'll start with the offense, and I'll pick up right where you left off, because the first possession of the game, let's start right there, because Kyle McCord, probably the most talented quarterback, at least on paper, to come through Syracuse since Donovan McNabb. He drops back, and he fires right to Blake Leak, and Blake Leak doesn't play for Syracuse. Unfortunately for the Orange, he is the hands of a linebacker and just drops it. And I think that really tempered the mood right at the start. So the Orange go 3 and out. There's a little bit of a murmur in the crowd, but McCord looks a lot better after that. So he finishes 18 for 24 for 211 yards and 4 touchdowns. And he seemed comfortable in the offense and was consistently looking for Arande Gatson, who also looked fully healthy. So that's a really encouraging sign. And another thing that I wanted to point out was clock management, because it was a problem under Dino Babers. It was a problem under Scott Schaefer. And it was not a problem on Saturday. I think you mentioned at the end of the second quarter, there's 59 seconds left. They go 75 yards. Syracuse does it in 8 plays. And for once, they use their timeouts correctly. So that to me was a really encouraging sign. So I think when you look at clock management, some people getting healthy, at least on the offensive side on the ball, and then McCord really settling in and finding his receivers. And one thing that I want to point out that I think you may want to touch on as well is Trevor Pena. He really emerged. He's been injured the last few years, but he emerged as a star. And he was a factor in offense, which we actually haven't seen. So I thought all those signs really pointed to a good start for Syracuse against a group of 5 opponent. And I think you have to keep in mind that it is a group of 5 opponent heading into a week 2 matchup against ACC's Georgia Tech. But I actually really like what I saw on Saturday afternoon from the Orange offense.
Yeah, I did actually mention Pena in my post-game observations. He showed his speed as a freshman because he returned, I believe, a kickoff, I think it was, for a touchdown against Clemson. And when you're going the length of the field against Clemson, that usually says something about your talent, your ability, your skill. And he just never really had a chance to really show off much of that after that. He was used sparingly as a sophomore, season-ending injury early last year, but he was able to use it yesterday at that speed. We saw some in the spring game when they were using him downfield over the center of the field, but yesterday was still did some of that, but they also used him using horizontally. They had hit him once on a drag route for a first down. They kind of cleared out and then just hit him ahead of a defender underneath for a short game, but I believe actually converted to a first down. But then they also used him as a ball carrier on jet sweeps. I think he carried the ball 3 times, including for that third touchdown he scored. And he showed, along with Gadsden, a very good connection with Kyle McCord. McCord was accurate all day, with the exception of a couple bad throws, including that first throw you talked about that was a near interception. The replays on television made it look like it was halfway between Allen and I think it was Zeed Haynes, who was a receiver who was probably like 6 to 8 yards further downfield. And it looked like he just splitting the difference between the two of them. It was either overthrowing Allen massively or wildly underthrowing Haynes. And that's how it was a near interception. But beyond that, McCord looked great. And I think his accuracy actually circles back to what you were talking about, that clock management. That drive late in the second quarter scored just before halftime, it was a lot of what we have not seen in recent years with the Orange. Accurate downfield throwing. It was completion for a first down. Stops clock, get up to the line, set, go. Another completion for a first down. Hurry up to the line, clock it, and then go. And it's just they were moving the ball efficiently through the air, gaining, first down after first down after first down. It was a 75-yard drive, as you said, in 8 plays. There was a 55-yard pass that flipped the field and they had to grind out and incompletions and stopping the clock. It was consistent chain moving passes. And that was a big part of that drive as well. McCord was terrific. He was everything he was advertised to be. And if not for the holding call on just before that wiped out a 45-yard pass to Gadsden on the play before his interception in the fourth quarter, he might have had a 400-yard day and possibly a 5th touchdown pass.
So we're going to take a quick break and we'll have more on Syracuse's win over Ohio. This is the Juice on the Cuse podcast here on the Rivals and Believe Network. This is the Bet Online read. Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. Bet Online has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. You think you know your stuff? Get in on our $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200,000. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Bet Online, the game starts here. Back here on the Juice on the Cuse podcast, Wes Cheng alongside Jim Stechschulte. Let's dive more into the opening win week over Ohio. And Jim, I want to talk more about the defense because as solid as the offense may have looked against a G5 opponent, you touched on it, but the defense was not as inspiring, especially against the run. Syracuse gave up 255 yards on the ground compared to 126 for the Orange. Jim, that has to concern you, especially heading into a week 2 matchup against a run-heavy team in Georgia Tech, potentially without their top linebacker.
Yeah, it was a little jarring to see how much free space Anthony Tyus III had throughout the game. 203 yards and 2 touchdowns by himself on the ground, including a couple of long breakaways. He had over 12 yards a carry, which is just frankly unacceptable. We had questions. We talked about it in our podcast to preview the season about the defensive line for the Orange. Fadil Diggs had a couple sacks, and there were the team did have, I don't know, I would call it like almost like a boom or bust, feast or famine kind of aspect to it, as far as they did, pile up a good number of tackles for loss in the game. But at the same time, they were just repeatedly gouged by the Bobcat running game. It is very concerning, as you said, coming up next week for the Georgia Tech game. Georgia Tech, in both their games they've had this year against Florida State and Georgia State, have had their running backs collectively average over 6.5 yards per carry. And after what the Orange showed on defense last night, you just have to hope that there's something that's a quick cleanup of some sort, or otherwise it could be a rough second game of the season.
Yeah, Jim, I agree. Just plenty of concern there. Anthony Tyus II, or I should say Anthony Tyus III, kind of looking like Tyus Battle out there in the dome. I mean, he bulldozed Syracuse for 203 yards. And I think what's really concerning was he was running it right through the AB gap consistently. And you mentioned in our 2024 Syracuse football preview podcast, but both the offensive and defensive lines were going to be the concern. You highlighted that, and that's exactly what happened on Saturday. And to be sure, Fadil Diggs, he did his job grabbing 2 sacks on the afternoon, but the interior line looked really concerning. Second team All-MAC center, Parker Titsworth, I thought he really gave the defensive line fits. And of course, it doesn't help when you have your All-ACC linebacker, Marlo Wax. He went down early in the game. We're going to have to see what the update is during Fran Brown's Monday press conference. He mentioned that he might be out for a few weeks, but that's really before they get a deep dive and take a look at exactly what happened to his leg. But if they lose Wax for the rest of the season, that is a huge, huge blow to the defense. Yeah,
it's very concerning. The linebackers, while Wax and McDonald are returning starters, and Wax, of course, is probably the best player on the defensive side of the ball for the Orange. It's very concerning. I mean, they only play 2 linebackers in their base anyway, so it's not a huge deal. Anwar Sparrow Jr. has a good amount of experience for a reserve, so it looks like he might get promoted into the starting lineup. Or maybe James Hurd, who was listed second on the 2 deep, the transfer from West Virginia, who did come in late in the game and ended up getting that interception, the lone turnover that the Orange forced, plucking that deflected pass out of the air for an interception that effectively ended Ohio's chances of victory. But yeah, the Wax injury is very concerning. We obviously it's the first game. We haven't heard Fran Brown talk much about injuries and how he plays that stuff I assume it's going to be close to the vest because, schematic advantage, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know if his statement that they might miss that Wax might miss a few weeks is actual, or just kind of preparing for a minimum kind of amount of time that he'll be out, or is much more literal based on what the early suggestions are from the medical reports on Wax that were made during, and then probably something after the game quickly as well.
So, Jim, we're only one game into the season, but this is, in fact, Syracuse's most anticipated opener, I would argue, since the 2019 season after Syracuse's 10-win season in 2018. So many came in, especially they came into this podcast with 8 or 9-win expectations. You put yourself down for 8 wins. Does this opening win, from what you've seen, change anything that you've thought of so far?
Well, my instant reaction would be, especially with how the run defense looked, maybe scaling it back, but the same, especially with Georgia Tech coming up next. The good news is after Georgia Tech, they have a bye week before Stanford comes in for the Friday night game. So if things don't go great against the Yellow Jackets on Saturday, there is time to kind of circle the wagons and figure out what they can and can't do, make changes, to use that extra practice time to shift. Because I think, especially if the run defense is still a problem against Georgia Tech, that's something they're going to have to work on and figure out some adjustments for long term, and not just an opponent specific kind of change. The other side of that coin, though, was the offensive line. I mean, McCord did get sacked a couple times, took some hits. The offensive line was our question on offense as well. But overall, if he is able to stay in the pocket for 2-3 seconds and get guys open downfield, the receivers the skill position players, I think is probably a fairer way to say that, looked as advertised in the before the season. Gadsden was terrific. With him being bulked up, he was just bullying Ohio all night long. And it just seems like if the Orange gets a 3rd and 8, they can just essentially send him 12 yards downfield and tell him to post up and box out a guy, and he's going to move the change. Pena, we talked about him having a good game, and I'm interested to see, because they ran the jet sweep enough with him that knowing that there's going to be something to build off that they're going to keep using, that eventually there's going to be jet sweep motion to him, because they've shown that they will keep using it. And then how are they going to run plays? Are they using that as a play action? And what they run off of that, they're going to maybe do a little bootleg in the opposite direction to get McCord out in space and run a drag route to the corner or something like that, and then look, when Allen, while he took a backseat in the first half, in the second half, specifically the third quarter, he really came to life when the Orange got their ground game going. He had 5 carries in the first half for, I think it was 19 yards. He had 4 carries that were for double digits in the third quarter alone, as he ended up pushing his way up to nearly 100 yards in the ground. I just think that the diverse skill position level of quality that they have, as far as McCord, the receivers, and then Allen, because even Zede Haynes didn't have a big game, but had a big catch. Jackson Meeks had 1 long catch downfield. I mean, they were able to get downfield a lot. And I think if McCord is able to continue throwing the ball with that degree of accuracy, I think their ability in the pass game on offense is going to help offset any deficiencies on the run game on defense, and maybe kind of even things out a little bit. I mean, also maybe some of the teams that we thought were going to be tougher matchups are maybe not so much on that schedule. Virginia Tech in particular, losing at Vanderbilt, it's first game. You don't want to take too much out of it and change everything for the season, but it makes me feel like maybe Virginia Tech is, a half step or a full step lower on the food chain than we all thought coming into the season. So maybe that's a game that we thought the Orange would lose before, but maybe we can reconsider, hey, maybe they have a chance to pull that one out instead. So I think staying the course for now, seeing what happens with Wax, and then seeing what happens next week against Georgia Tech is really would make me want to change expectations for the season instead of just one game result.
Yeah, so I had them down for 7 wins at the beginning of the season, so I don't think I'm going to adjust my win-loss expectation too much. I still expect them to sweep through their 9-conference schedule to get to 4 wins, and then we'll have to see how the ACC season plays out, and I'm really interested to see what happens in the Georgia Tech game, again, for the reasons you just mentioned. Georgia Tech's a really good run team. Syracuse looked like they struggled to stop the run, and I also want to see what happens when offensive coordinator Jeff Nixon really opens up the playbook, because it's clear that he didn't want to show his cards during a group of 5 game, and I don't blame him. You saw that first play call went out of the pistol formation, and we didn't really see much of that after. And I think he mostly kept McCord in the shotgun. That allowed him to drop back. He found all his different wide receivers, so I thought McCord looked good. So I would like to see the different types of looks that they can give heading into, again, an ACC matchup where you haven't shown all the cards yet. So let's see what happens there. I'm still going to keep my win prediction at 7. Again, we don't know how Wax is going to recover from his injury. We also don't know how good the ACC teams are yet. I think it's going to take a couple more weeks so we can figure out where we get there. So I'm still going to stick with my 7 wins, and we'll just have to see how the rest of the season plays out. That's it for us. For Jim Stechschulte, this is Wes Cheng. You've been listening to the Juice on the Cuse podcast, powered by the Believe in Rivals Networks, and we will see you next time.